into lobes. There are 5 lobes that make up the brain. 4 of them are very, very easy once you've learned the skull. Because if I put my brain up on my head like this, the frontal lobe is located under the frontal bone. You need to know frontal lobe. The parietal lobe is located under the parietal bone. The temporal lobe is located under the temporal bone. And the occipital lobe is located under the occipital bone. So frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital. That's 4 of the lobes. The 5th lobe is hiding a little bit. So if I go up here and quickly steal the 8-part brain, and I can, on the 8-part brain, remove the frontal and parietal lobes. And hiding underneath, you see this extra little wrinkly mass located down here. That's your insular lobe. You might remember the insular lobe, me mentioning it when I talked about the gustatory cortex and all that. That's where it's hiding. It's insulated by the other lobes. So it's the insula. It works. Okay, so that's that. Now you might have noticed when I had the brain in 2 pieces that there's a big gap between the right cerebral hemisphere, which I have here in my hands, and the left cerebral hemisphere over here. And that big gap between the 2 is called the longitudinal fissure. So that's going to be the Mohawk gap. It traces the brain from front to back. We've got our longitudinal fissure going from front to back. On the side of the brain, it's wrinkly. So we have a lot of what I call hills and valleys. Anytime you have a valley, we call it a sulcus. And where you have a hill, we call it a gyrus. We are not going to name all of the hills and valleys. We're going to name a couple big ones. One very important one is this little valley here called the central sulcus. The central sulcus separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. And the central sulcus is important because of the hills it separates. The hill in front of the central sulcus is called the precentral gyrus. So pre in front of central gyrus, so because it's in front of the central sulcus. And you'll never guess that the hill behind is called the postcentral gyrus. So it makes a lot of sense. Remember from class that we said the precentral gyrus is your primary motor cortex. That was that somatotopy map of the body for all your control. And the postcentral gyrus was your somatosensory association somatosensory cortex, where all the signals were going in, with a similar somatotopy taking place. We also have the lateral sulcus, located on the side, which separates the temporal lobe from the parietal and frontal lobes. And the 3rd sulcus I want you to know is a bit of a trick. You can't see it from the outside of the brain. You need to go inside. But there you can see this line on the inside of the brain, which is called the parieto-occipital sulcus, because it separates the parietal and occipital lobes. The next thing I'm going to do is get into the things we can see on the inside half of the brain. So if we're looking at this, what can we see? And even though I haven't gone through your textbook yet, I guarantee your textbook has a picture of this. And it'll be very nice, and it's very good for studying off of, so it works really well. So what parts do we have on here? Well, we see this very large, conspicuous white band running across here, and that's your corpus callosum. The corpus callosum collector connects the right side to the left side, so it connects the right and left hemispheres. If any of you did psych class, you may have learned about some neat things they did for people who suffered some wicked grand mal seizures back in the day. If you have a grand mal seizure, it's like an electrical storm sloshing back and forth in your brain. Kind of like waves in a bathtub. Because they're contained, you make waves, they go to one end and back to the other, and one end and back to the other. And they got the idea that if you cut the corpus callosum, you cut the path of the electrical storm, right? It starts in one hemisphere, can't get to the other. Did it reduce the intensity of the grand mal seizures? Absolutely it did. The catch is you now had people who were split-brained. Their 2 hemispheres could not talk to one another. For a general everyday thing, would you notice anything? You walked, you had a conversation, you asked them how's the weather? No, they were fine. It didn't interfere with anything like that. But there are all these weird things about if they saw something out of their left field of vision, could their right hand manipulate it? Had a lot of troubles. A lot of things about the 2 sides of your brain working together. So depending on which field of view they were looking at, I can't remember all the details, they may see a picture of an apple, know what it is, but not have a clue the word for it, like you were asking them to speak a foreign language, or looking at their other field of view, see the word apple written and be able to read it, but not have a clue what it refers to. Very interesting stuff with their fields of vision. All right, So we've got our big white corpus callosum. At the front, underneath that, there's this little teardrop shape you can see. And that little teardrop is the septum pellucidum. So you can see a little teardrop up there called the septum pellucidum. It is a window to a ventricle. We're going to talk about those in a little bit. If we go to the back, under the choroid plexus, you can see that, or under the corpus callosum, we can see a pink structure called the choroid plexus. So we see a little pink choroid plexus. Yep. And that choroid plexus is responsible for producing the cerebrospinal fluid. So it's making the fluid to lubricate or float the brain, I guess might be a better example. If you look in the middle, you'll see a brown dot. So there's a fairly conspicuous brown dot right in the middle. That brown dot is called the interthalamic adhesion. The tissue around the brown dot, so everything I'm touching as I circle around the brown dot, is the thalamus. It's important to remember that the thalamus is recessed. So when you put the thalamus together, there's a space in the middle. Like I had two cups going together, it creates a space in the middle. So everyone can sort of imagine that. It gets important when we come back to another feature later on. If I go forward from the thalamus, you can see a little white W. Everyone see a little white W there? The tissue inside the W. So if I've got a W with my fingers, the tissue enclosed inside the white W, so it's just in front of and below the interthalamic adhesion, that's your hypothalamus. So it's in the little white W. Now my brain doesn't have it because all of our two-part brains have fallen apart. But if I find the 8-part brain, you guys have it. Sorry, only one half here. If I steal this 8-part brain, you can see dangling down from the hypothalamus is the pituitary gland. It tends to break off. There's our little pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland would sit in the hypophyseal fossa of the sella turcica. You guys remember that from skulls? No? I know everyone does different terms, so I never know which ones you've done. Doesn't matter. They're not going to have it in a skull. You just need to know that that dangly bit is the pituitary gland. Now, if I go back to my thalamus in the middle and then go to the back end, you'll see a little white thing dangling back. Some people say it looks like a handwritten M. You see a little handwritten M at the back? That little handwritten M that you see at the back is the epithalamus. So it's the epithalamus. Yep. And that's where you'll find the pineal gland. If you go just below the epithalamus, you'll see what I call the little white bum. So if you look at your brain up close, do you see a little white bum? It's got two cheeks. Top cheek and bottom cheek. You guys see it? Okay. The little white bum, and again, we're going to have time when I can come around and help you at closer distances, is called the corpora quadrigemina. So two words, corpora. That spells okay. Quadrigemina, Q-U-A-D-R-I-G-E-M-I-N-A. Think. Corpora quadrigemina. The corpora quadrigemina, the bum, is divided into the two cheeks. The top cheek is called the superior colliculi. You might remember that from when we were talking about the eye and vision and fight or flight and all that sort of stuff. And the bottom cheek is called the inferior colliculi. Now if I keep going down from the bum, we encounter this large brown colored mass that we see at the back here. And this large brown mass at the back is the cerebellum. If you look inside the cerebellum, you'll see a white tree. Everyone see our white tree in here? And the white tree is the arbor vitae. Just means tree of life. So the little white tree is the arbor vitae. If I now come forward a little bit back to the front, we can see this egg-shaped structure here, which is the pons. Just below the pons is this small swelling right here, the medulla oblongata. And if I keep going down, eventually that's going to become spinal cord. Now I'm going to steal the other half of the brain for just a sec to show some features that are found on the bottom of the brain. So if I look on the bottom of the brain, you can see two little white balls. You see them?
Yep.
Where my fingernail is? So just to quickly, see the two little white balls? the only time I can run around the class, say, look at my white balls and not get fired for it. Full advantage of the situation. Everyone sees it? Now actually, they're called mammillary bodies. Quite the opposite. And when I thought they were that, I thought, okay, they must be called that because they're found only on mammals or something like that. And then I read somewhere, no, the guy who first identified these things thought they looked like breasts. So he called them the mammillary bodies. It's lonely in the lab. And guys tend to see breasts in many, many places. If you look on either side of them, you'll see two little, I call them pillars. One has a 33 on it. See the 33 next to my fingernail there? You guys see the little 33 next to my left fingernail? Yeah. So those are the pillars. Yeah, the left fingernail's got one.
Oh, yes.
See the little 33 where my left fingernail is? Imagine one on the other side. See where the 33 is on the left? Those are the cerebral peduncles. So there's the cerebral peduncles. Now that, so you don't have to video anymore if you don't want to. That pretty much